Hi, everyone. I'm Myra, and I'm here with Jane Wells, the head field hockey coach at Johns Hopkins University. Jane, thank you so much for being here and letting me interview you.
Happy to be here, Myra.
So, getting started, during a normal preseason, pre-COVID, what activities or strategies do you implement within the field hockey team to build those relationships and really make a cohesive team?
Sure. Great question, Myra. I think, most often we're really trying to put our team members in small groups and facilitate more in-depth discussion and experiences as much as possible. And so we utilize training teams to do that, as well as kind of various other strategies. There have been some things as little as when we're eating lunch together, splitting up the tables differently and giving each table a topic for discussion, to try and help the new players feel more comfortable, and for the older players to have built-in opportunities to invest in them. And we always definitely try and do something fun and away from the game also at some point during preseason.
So my freshman year, which I guess was 2 years ago now, we did our activity away from everything was an escape room. So, can you tell me why exactly you picked an escape room?
We picked an escape room because we thought it would be fun, and we felt like the team would like it. And also, it requires engagement, right? There's no option to just kind of sit back and not do anything. And so it forces that bit of engagement. The thing I remember about that most, though, was the bus ride. Which I think maybe resulted in more team building than anything else, because we inadvertently put ourselves in kind of a high stress environment, and seeing how people reacted, and what we were able to do, and then what the follow-up was was really interesting.
Yeah. So, did you see any differences among the training teams after the escape room?
That's a good question. I think it's hard to remember back, and I wasn't quite so intentional about it, as I would be now after, taking the leadership theory and some of the courses I've taken in my graduate program. But I do think it probably helped the training teams become closer. What do you think, Mai?
Yeah, I think it definitely helped just because you get a different sense for how people are rather than playing on the field and just talking about field hockey. And it's also a different set of skills that you implement that aren't related to your athletic ability at all or anything like that.
Yeah, I think too, it's a transition from a competitive environment to more collaborative environment. And we do a lot of competing. And, with the escape rooms, the teams were in theory competing against each other, but it was, it required a lot of collaboration to be successful. And so I think shifting that focus is always important for our team in particular, because we're so high achievement oriented.
Yeah. So you just mentioned how after taking these courses, you would be more deliberate about it in the future. How do you think you would move forward in the future doing different activities? And how do you think that throughout your coaching career, the activities that you do or team building strategies, how have those changed?
Yeah, I think those are good questions. I think incorporating a little bit more vulnerability, especially from the coaching staff, will be important, especially as I continue to get older and college students stay the same age. Just really trying to show a little bit more human side of myself, and maybe even me personally being more involved in some of the stuff we're doing. I really like to give our athletes a lot of space on their own away from our staff, but I also think it's important to build those bonds, especially between our team leaders and our first year athletes and the coaching staff. I think, in the future, I might be a little bit more thoughtful about what type of activity we're choosing and the timing of that, and do a little bit more in prep for the activity as well as follow up. A lot of times
Mhm.
it just seems like this kind of one isolated thing, and it's okay, well, we did it and it was great. But I think, doing a little bit more on the front end and on the back end could make it a more meaningful exercise, and being able to tie it in better to what we're doing on the field.
Hmm. And how do you think preseason plays into all of this? Like, because I know during preseason is when like everyone's just getting to know each other. So like in the future, do you think it would be helpful to space out more team building activities to like really like make sure during the middle of the season, once everyone has like known each other for like a month or two, do you think like doing one then would like allow like people to have like closer relationships?
I think that would be really good, Myra. I also think the spring probably would be a good idea, like doing something like team building wise during our spring season. Those times are a little bit more challenging because we tend to be like kind of all business and there are a lot of competing priorities. But I think as our team continues to get stronger, the team building piece becomes a greater priority. I mean, that's one of the things that separates good teams from great teams, right? And
Yeah.
so being able to invest there more might help. But I think oftentimes when we've thought about doing something like team building oriented in the middle of the season, we've gotten the feedback that players would rather just have a little extra time off.
Yeah.
And so trying to like balance those competing needs is definitely a challenge, but definitely something to consider in the future.
Yeah. Okay. So now shifting gears to the five dysfunctions of a team. So, which dysfunction is most prevalent when we were in person? And do you think this has changed now that we're in a virtual setting?
Um, this is tough. I would say the thing that maybe stands out to me most is like the fear of conflict. And I see that mostly between like the coaches and the athletes. Like, I don't necessarily see that like amongst you guys, but a little bit, you know, like you're really close friends and kind of afraid to step on each other's toes. And I would say that that might be where we're struggling most. What do you think?
Yeah, I definitely think that's the one that I would think of. And I think, like, from my perspective, I guess it's more because, especially now that we're virtual and you get to see your friends less, like, there is more of, I guess, like maybe a divide because we're not as close. And, like I said, we haven't seen each other and we don't have like a sport to like basically like bring us together. But I also think like before that, I guess just for me, I avoid conflict
Yeah.
basically at all costs. So
Yeah, it's interesting reading the five dysfunctions, like the way that like good meetings were described was
yeah,
like a little bit like scary for me to think about even. Like I'm like, oh my God, that meeting sounds like good, but also horrible.
yeah,
And you know, I think the business setting doesn't always translate like perfectly to sport. But I do think that our team would benefit from more like challenging each other and like the players challenging us as coaches more, giving us more feedback. I think a lot of times like we set you guys up to say what we want to hear. And so I'm trying to be better about that and like asking for feedback in different ways because a lot of times I'll say something like, oh, that program was really good. What did you think? And so
yeah,
then I've set the expectation that you also say that it was good.
yeah,
And so, you know, one thing is like just changing my wording around stuff when I'm asking for feedback. And then another thing I'm trying to do is like allow for more time for you guys to answer and like being more comfortable in those silences.
yeah,
Because sometimes when people don't answer, I just like fill the silence, just like move on to something else. um, and so definitely trying to like be more aware there. I think like with the virtual environment in particular, it leads to a lack of like clarity, which kind of falls under the commitment piece of just like, even though we talk about it a lot, we're just not quite on the same page.
yeah,
And there's a lack of clarity with our objectives too. Like we want to stay reasonably fit and be as prepared as possible for when we are able to play again. We're
Mhm.
also trying to like learn and grow off the field and, like do all these things.
Yeah.
But like, what's the end goal, right? Like, what's the like collective focus? And I felt a little bit uh, uncertain about that at times this fall.
Yeah. So what do you think are some strategies that would maximize communication amongst your team now that we're virtual and like improve this?
Yeah, you know what we talked about I met with the captains last week
Mhm.
after the Halloween incident situation.
Yeah.
Um, and we talked about like redoing the team guidelines around the environment that we're currently in.
Yeah.
And I thought that was a really great idea. I was
Mhm.
like, like one of the captains was like, have you intentionally not revisited the guidelines this year? And I was like, no, I honestly like haven't thought about it because
Yeah.
to me it's like it's a preseason meeting thing. And so that's when I'm like,
Yeah.
okay, we've got to get the guidelines out. But I didn't recognize that like it would be so great to revisit the guidelines right now because we're in a totally
Mhm.
different environment than we're normally in.
Yeah.
And so, like, we need to have something to kind of guide our actions, and we just don't have that right now. And so, that's something that we're going to work on in the next, month or so.
Mhm. So do you think that's mainly because like the events of our season are altered now that it's virtual? Because normally like we would do this during preseason. So do you think not having like a preseason environment or like a time to like go through the rules, do you think that has like negatively impacted our team?
I do, but I don't see it having a huge impact. And I think
Mhm.
part of it is because we only have 5 freshmen.
Yeah.
I think, everyone kind of knows what the standard is at this point and what the
Mhm.
expectations are. It's just more about shifting the expectations to our current environment. And I think if we'd done that earlier, it would have been smarter. Um, but you never like deal with stuff until something happens.
Yeah.
And I think trying to get out in front of it would have been helpful. Um, but I think there's also so much gained and learned from going through the experience of dealing with the challenge.
Yeah. And it's like hard to say that this would have happened until it happened.
Yep.
So going back to we have 5 freshmen, and has it been harder for you to add members to our team now that we're virtual?
I think yes and no. Back to what I was saying before about getting to know
Mhm.
you guys better off the field. I feel
Yeah.
like I know this group of freshmen so well, and like
Mhm.
they're acting less scared of me than they normally do, which is great. Just because I think they're getting to know me like away from hockey.
Yeah.
And so I've been really grateful for that opportunity. I think normally it's like pretty intimidating to join a college sports team and it's go, go, go all the time during preseason. You know how it is. And so there's like just a natural like hesitation on their part.
Mhm.
Um, but I think, with how it's has been challenging is of course not being able to see them in person and for them not to be able to see you guys in person.
Yeah. And so going off of that, how do you think that you've like what strategies have you done to build trust with our new members now that it's virtual? And will this impact how you build relationships with freshmen in the future?
Oh, that's a great question. I think the first part, like how will it impact what we do in the future? Is that what you said?
Yeah.
Like, I think with this group of freshmen, um, will be like really attentive to their on-field adjustments in the spring. Hopefully we'll be able to practice.
Mhm.
And so there will be like a greater focus there than in other facets, just because I feel like they've settled in pretty well, like
Mhm.
personally.
Yeah.
Um, I do think it will change how we welcome new team members in the future. I have a love-hate relationship with Zoom, just like everybody else. And there's so many good uses for it with
Mhm.
recruiting that it's like, why haven't we been doing this for the last
Yeah.
5 years, you know? And one of those things is we did virtual home visits with all of the freshmen and their families this summer.
Oh, that's
It,
fun.
and so they're literally like eating dinner and had like their Zoom on the dinner table, and Britt and I are there like eating our dinners, and we're just like talking
Oh my God.
and just hanging out, right? And
Yeah.
I think that's allowed me to get to know them within the context of their families a little bit
Mhm.
better, and also get to know their families, their parents and siblings. And so, you know, I do think that that will stay. Um, and I think we always meet in person, right? Like if there's anything to talk about, we always meet in person. And I think that there will be some things where I just like call you guys on FaceTime, or we pop onto a Zoom to talk about something, rather than you like dragging yourself over to the athletic center and me
Yeah.
like going to work for this one meeting. You know, when I could
Uh-huh.
be like on a Sunday or answering emails from home in the morning or
Yeah.
whatever it may be. So I do think that we'll utilize the technology a little bit more, and definitely with the recruiting. Um, like we've done all kinds of different recruiting seminars, which have been super fun.
Mhm.
And we have them all like on YouTube now that we can send out. So it's like a student's asking about pre-med, and it's like, boom, here's our pre-med webinar. Like,
Yeah.
check it out. And so that stuff will be really useful in the long term, especially as we continue to try and build a national roster. This is one of kind of like the hallmarks of our program. And so,
Mhm.
like, I think as we recruit kids from California, rather than just waiting for them to find the time to come visit, like, we
Yeah.
can do so much other
Mhm.
stuff before we get to that point.
Yeah, that's definitely true. It's definitely like broadened how recruiting can be done. So now that you've built this trust, especially with the freshmen, and I guess like between other members of the team, how do you think you can best maintain this trust, especially during the transition into the spring season when it becomes less about like getting to know each other and more about playing?
Yeah, I think a lot of individual check-ins, right? And some
Yeah.
mentoring by you guys as our more veteran players. But there's definitely going to be a reality checkpoint for them of like, oh shoot, like their expectations, you know?
Yeah.
And I think one of the nice things with a smaller group is that we don't have as high of expectations of them, and being able to come into
Mhm.
spring season rather than a fall season will be helpful. Um, but I do think that they're gonna have some like sticky points of like, man, like Jane was like really hard on us at practice today, or
Yeah.
like I can't handle practice and studying for this midterm and, you know, XYZ that I have going on. And so just like being able to communicate that we're there to support them and finding the appropriate supports in those moments.
Mhm.
I think so much of it is about like timing, and just like keeping an extra eye on them so we're recognizing sooner, and
Mhm.
also relying on communication with our captains so that we're hearing that information from them before we're even noticing like,
Mhm.
hey, you know, this freshman is like not having a great week, can you make sure that you're not hard on her at practice, or, you know, just check in with her or whatever it might be.
So are you still planning on having the small groups? Because I know we have small groups right now and they switch. So it's a great opportunity for everyone on the team to get to know each other in a smaller setting and like more individually. But will these small groups still come into effect during the spring?
So we'll take a long break over Thanksgiving and winter break,
Mhm.
where we'll do some optional activities that are mostly just fun stuff for you guys. And then in January, we'll go back to that third set of small groups, and we'll have like mandatory meetings twice a week for
Mhm.
4 weeks, basically. Maybe even three. It might just be 3 weeks. And then once school starts and field hockey starts, it will depend a little bit on the structure. I haven't thought about it too much yet, just because we don't know what the structure is going to look like. But I think, team building will be an important part of the process, just because we haven't been on the field together at that point. It will have been like 15 months. And so it's almost in some ways like starting new again. And so just making sure that we're aware of that, and trying to like meet everyone's individual needs as much as we can. But I would anticipate at this point that some sort of small group like work would be a part of that if we're able to train as a whole team. And if we're not able to train as a whole team, then we'll kind of naturally be funneled into those smaller groups. So that could work in some way.
Okay, and then going off of that, if you have practices that aren't as a whole team, or even if they are, how do you think the transition from going to really being like fully like just like learning about each other and not doing anything related to sports, and then like the team dynamic kind of shifts once you get competitive, like you said, like this is more collaborative right now, and then once it becomes competitive, how do you think the team will handle that, and do you think there will be any conflicts?
Yeah, I don't know. It's hard to predict. I think it's nice that we're going into a spring season where our focus is really on making each person a better player and less on the overall kind of team aspect. Like in the fall, we're always trying to be the best team that we can be. And in the spring, it's like, okay, let's like work for everybody to get better. And this will be some sort of weird hybrid because we're playing a bunch of games in theory. So I'm really not sure how we're going to handle it. But I anticipate with a team with 11 juniors, 7 or 8 of which started last year for the most part, like we have really, really strong leadership. And so that's what we'll rely on. And just for me, making sure I'm communicating with not just the captains, but your whole class really well. Especially in the absence of Britt and trying to acclimate potentially a new assistant coach also. Like that to me is going to be the bigger acclimation. It's like not the freshman, but the new assistant coach.
Yeah, that's a great point. Okay, well, thank you so much for letting me interview you.
Sure, Myra.